Welcome. Keeping in line with my last video where we discussed Hegesias of Cyrene, also known as Pacinthanatos or the Death Persuader, today I thought I'd follow up on another of ancient world's most interesting monikers, at least in my opinion, with another enigmatic ancient Greek philosopher who was also active around the time of Hegesias, known as Theodorus the Atheist. So let's set the picture. We're in Cyrene, which is in Libya, but at the time a colony of the ancient Greeks. It's 300 years BCE, and we're following another student of the Socratic school of philosophy, who like Hegesias developed quite a following through his work. If you remember last time when discussing the lineage from Socrates to Hegesias, we branched off at Aristippus' students. We followed the progression from Antipater of Cyrene and got to Hegesias. Well, today I want to follow the alternative branch of Aristippus' pupil through the lineage of his daughter, Arete. So we've got Socrates, who taught Aristippus, who taught his daughter Arete, who taught her son, also named Aristippus, who then taught today's subject, Theodorus, more commonly known as Theodorus the Atheist, and perhaps later as Theodorus the God. Well, okay, that is the picture set, so let's get into this. Theodorus was born in Cyrene circa 340 BCE and died around 250 BCE. We know during his life, in addition to living in Cyrene, he lived in both Alexandria and in Greece, being banished by almost every city he stayed in along the journey. Like Hegesias, he's a student of Aristippus, which means that puts him in line with most of Hegesias' points of view, minus the parts on suicide. Namely, though, that the goal of life was to obtain pleasure and to avoid pain, which he argued the former is a result of knowledge and the latter a result of ignorance. However, the reason he gets a mention today, other than the fact he has an interesting moniker, is because of what is written about him by Diogenes Laertius in his book Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers. In Diogenes' section on Aristippus, he states the following: having written his life, in which he's referring to Aristippus, let me now proceed to pass and review the philosophers of the Cyrenaic schools which sprang from him. Although some call themselves followers of Hegesias, others followers of Anaxagoras, others again of Theodorus. So straight off the bat we have something a little strange, because all this is mentioned before he mentions anything about any of the other Cyrenaic philosophers in between Aristippus and the shared era of Hegesias, Anaxagoras, and Theodorus. Before it even mentions Aristippus' daughter, Arete, or his grandson, Aristippus the Younger, who both achieved quite a lot for their school of philosophy, or even Antipater, Aetiops, Epicurus, or Parabates for that matter, he has made note that the shared era of Hegesias, Anaxagoras, and Theodorus had a specifically large following. From Diogenes' point of view, say 500 years after the shared era, it was still known they had, at least historically speaking, a large enough following to be more memorable than any of the other followers of the original Aristippus. But again, I guess from a sensationalist standpoint of Diogenes, the supposed advocate of suicide, the apparent atheist, and the alleged ransom of Plato is perhaps more noteworthy than the philosophical teachings of their teachers. Diogenes doesn't seem to like Theodorus all that much, and it's probably that disliking why he gets so much attention compared to the others, and why we know more about him than we do Hegesias. Because apparently suicide is fine just as long as you don't denounce the gods in the process, which seems a little warped, but who am I to judge? But before I get into some of Diogenes' comments, I would just like to remind anyone who didn't watch my previous video on Hegesias that there is some criticism of Diogenes' work. To summarize, it's best taken as an uncritical and unphilosophical compilation rather than absolute fact. Doesn't mean it isn't interesting or worth reading, it does just mean take all the information as an opinion rather than complete truth. As I've said before, it is an ancient historical document on the basis of much of what we know about the private lives of ancient Greek philosophers, but it is written half a millennium after the event, so to say it is contemporary would be more than a little generous. Anyway, Diogenes refers to Theodorus as a man who utterly rejected the current belief in the gods, and I have come across a book of his entitled Of the Gods, which is not contemptible. He then also states from the book it is possible Epicurus borrowed most of what he wrote regarding the same subject. He went on to create his own system of philosophy called Epicureanism. Epicureanism, much like hedonistic teachings of Aristippus, taught the principles of pleasure and pain, although he amended the concepts to become ataraxia and aponia, with an added element of atomic materialism thrown in for good measure. But I digress. Diogenes goes on to state, Theodorus was also a pupil of Anaxagoras, and Dionysius the dialectician, as Antisthenes mentions in his book, Succession of Philosophers, suggesting that in addition to Aristippus, Theodorus was willing to listen to teachers from all over the philosophical spectrum of ancient Greece, although it then goes on to state, friendship he rejected because it did not exist between the unwise nor between the wise. With the former, when the want is removed, the friendship disappears, whereas the wise are self-sufficient and have no need for friends. Which is, well, probably somewhat accurate, really. But anyway, so far sounds very Hegesias, but where the difference in character becomes apparent is in what Diogenes writes next. To Theodorus, it was reasonable for the good man not to risk his life in defense of his country, for he would never throw away wisdom to benefit the unwise. It would also state Theodorus thought the world was his country, and also that theft, adultery, and sacrilege would be allowable upon occasion, since none of these acts is by nature base. If once you have removed the prejudice against them, which is kept up in order to hold the foolish multitude together, the wise man would indulge his passions openly without the least regard to circumstances, i.e. there is no point in throwing away your wisdom when all that is left will be the unwise. And beyond that, what stops us from doing whatever it is we want to do fundamentally comes down to social pressure. If it wasn't for that social pressure, humans would openly partake in all kinds of behavior that currently they are too ashamed or controlled to say publicly, like playing Warhammer 40k. Theodorus was also known for his use of interrogatories, where he would dictate questions to direct a response to further his point, such as,
"Is a woman who is skilled in grammar useful insofar as she is skilled in grammar?"
To which they reply yes, to which he would continue with,
"Is a boy or youth skilled in grammar useful insofar as he is skilled in grammar?"
Again, they reply yes. Theodorus would then press the argument to its conclusion by stating,
"They who use anything for the purpose for which it is useful does no wrong."
Which is an interesting philosophy to have, especially during a time when girls were homeschooled by their mothers while boys went away to a more traditional school setting. I like that he chose the phrase,
"A woman skilled in grammar,"
because it forces the other thinker to really question the narrative of the times in which they live. If a woman is skilled in grammar, if not useful in anything else, can you at least agree if she was taught grammar, she would be useful insofar as she has been taught grammar, which is an obvious yes to any critical thinker, not limited by the influences of the day. This sort of liberalism wouldn't become mainstream for over another 2,000 years, which is quite remarkable, really. Another interrogatory states,
"Is a woman who is beautiful useful insofar as she is beautiful, and the use of that beauty is to be enjoyed?"
Which is a bit of a dicey question by 21st century standards, but given the era where women were supposed to be modest and essentially property in the sense that they always belonged to a male master, it is quite a statement to say something of the effect of, your wife's beauty shouldn't be hidden at home, it should be in public for all to appreciate. Today such comments may make you feel he is a bit archaic, which, well, I mean, he is, but for the time that was quite radical thought. Women in ancient Greece had in their history at one point been allowed to own private property, but it seems around 500 BCE, women slipped back into the role of property, restricted rights, no legal representation, and social segregation. So Theodorus' comments coming after 200 years of women being property as the norm, so to say that knowing that no woman in ancient Greece at the time had ever experienced full rights, in my mind, it clearly shows he respected women far more than a lot of the people in that era. This would also be a good time to point out his connection to Hipparchia of Moronia, who was a female ancient Greek Cynic philosopher who apparently wrote multiple letters with Theodorus. This is where I could get lost in a tangent and derail myself from my points with interesting side notes, but I do want to point out that Hipparchia of Moronia was an interesting character, not just because she was an ancient female philosopher, of which there is few, but also at the time choosing to live what was described as Cynic poverty, by living on the streets with her husband and living off the land, but through choice rather than inability to do otherwise. So sort of think of it as today's off-grid movement, but minus 2,000 years of technological progress. But we can save Hipparchia of Moronia for another day, as if we go back to Theodorus, it appears he was called God in consequence, at least according to Diogenes, to the following argument, which was addressed to him by Stilpo. "Are you, Theodorus, what you declare yourself to be?" To this he assented, and Stilpo continued, "And do you say you are God?" To which he agreed. "Then it follows that you are God." Theodorus accepted this, and Stilpo said with a smile,
"But you rascal, at this rate you would allow yourself to be a jackdaw and 10,000 other things."
Yeah, okay, so fuck knows what that quote exactly means. A jackdaw is a crow, highly inquisitive, noted for its intelligence. 10,000 other things could be leading to his ability not to commit to any of his ideas in their entirety. However, I am no English lit student, so my hypothesis is quite likely bollocks, and you are free to correct me in the comments below. But anyway, the exchange does highlight how incredibly candidly he would speak with blasphemous undertones. It appears he didn't mind being mocked for his lack of belief in the gods, but also that his contemporaries found humor in this lack of belief. Am I surprised people back then were more religiously devout than now? No, of course not. But finding examples from antiquity where people would openly criticize religion, I mean, granted, this could be because 2,000 years of oppressive religions destroying anything which doesn't fit their narrative, but still, openly questioning religion usually had the connotation that you were also, by default, openly questioning the ruling monarchy, which obviously doesn't do well for your longevity, and also probably explains why he was banished from everywhere he went. Although, to be fair, it has always been debated if Theodorus was truly atheist or whether he just rejected the common deities. It's not as crazy as it sounds, as in the Hegesias video I pointed out that Buddhist scholars had been in Cyrene around the time of Theodorus. It is quite possible they were exposed to foreign concepts and opinions regarding the gods, and all other aspects of theology which ultimately altered their fundamental opinions on the subject, but again, that is conjecture and should be taken as opinion rather than fact. So here we have a man willing to listen to many philosophical speakers to help align his own moral philosophy, who spoke some wise and interesting words, and by his day's standards, a bit lefty politically speaking, with his views on warfare, borders, religion, and overall general hedonism. This to me is fascinating, as we tend to think of ideas are often born within our lifetimes, or at least within living memory of our closest relatives. But here we can see what people would consider 60s hippie rhetoric, yet being spoken by a man over 2,000 years ago. I think the fact change takes so long to happen, it distorts our perception of how people must have thought and behaved so long ago. I think if nothing else, Theodorus the Atheist shows us even at 300 BCE we were critical and existentially intelligent, even by today's standards. I also find it fascinating so much rhetoric that we hear today has its roots in existence for over 2 millennia. millennia. But anyway, at one later point, Diogenes states, however, Theodorus, sitting on one occasion beside Euryclides, the Hierophant, began,
Tell me, Euryclides, who are those who violate the mysteries?
Euryclides replied, those who disclose them to the uninitiated.
Then you violate them when you explain them to the uninitiated.
Which, if you ask me, is a completely valid point. I mean, how do you recruit already initiated followers without someone breaking the rules somewhere along the line? Regardless, Euryclides was not impressed, and Diogenes next states, yet he hardly would have escaped from being bought before the Areopagus if Demetrius of Phalerum had not rescued him. He also states, Amphicrates in his book Upon Illustrious Men writes Theodorus was condemned to drink hemlock. Having managed to escape forced suicide, it then follows. For a while he stayed at the court of Ptolemy, son of Lagus, and was once sent by him as ambassador to Lysimachus. And on this occasion his language was so bold that Lysimachus said, Tell me, are you not Theodorus who was banished from Athens? To which he replied,
Your information is correct, for when Athens could not bear me any more than Semele could Dionysius, she cast me out.
Which is a religious burn, a 300 BCE mic drop if ever I heard one. Upon Lysimachus adding, Take care you do not come here again.
I never will, unless Ptolemy sends me.
Mithras, the king's minister, standing by and saying, It seems that you can ignore not only the gods but kings as well. To which Theodorus replied,
How can you say I ignore the gods when I regard you as hateful to the gods?
On another occasion it states, He is said in Corinth to have walked abroad with a numerous train of pupils. When Metrocles the cynic, who was washing Chervil, remarked, You sore-faced that you are, would not have wanted all these pupils if you had washed vegetables. Thereupon Theodorus retorted,
And you, if you had known how to associate with men, would have no use for these vegetables.
Which may have sexist undertones, but this is more of a jab at the previously mentioned cynic poverty, where cynics live on the street, beg, pick their own vegetables, things that most ancient Greeks didn't aspire to be like. If you want to think of cynic poverty in a more 21st century term, think of it like India's notorious caste system, and think of the cynic poverty movement as a group of people, not from the lowest caste, but by free choice, choosing to live as if they were. A final note from Diogenes states, At last he retired to Cyrene, where he lived with Magus and continued to be held in high honor. The first time he was expelled from Cyrene, he is credited with the witty remark,
Many thanks, men of Cyrene, for driving me from Libya into Greece.
In short, simply put, I genuinely don't think this man gave much of a fuck about anything. He spoke his mind, he didn't limit his thoughts or feelings, he would accept his banishment, he would wander, and at the end of it all, was ultimately held in high regard and would have a lasting following. I guess if you're going to take anything away from this video, let it be it's better to be honest than to be liked.